Welcome to another episode of War Stories. Today's story is going to be about an individual, William Allen. And the one thing that we know about war is not every general, not every soldier is going to be recognized in the national headlines, but it doesn't mean they're any less important.
Exactly.
And William Allen plays into that perfectly. In the United States at that time, around the 1850s, right before the Civil War started in 1861, we had some folks that were oppressed, and they were known as Southerners. And what happened was there was a lot of issues that the Southerners had to deal with at that time. And it's very relatable to today, where the government was treating one group of people separate than they were treating another group of people.
Yes.
The South was plagued with extremely high tariffs. There was issues of states' rights and issues with enslaved individuals at that time.
Well, see, yeah, like in 1840, from 1840 to 1849, I did a quick recap on what was going on with the slavery movement during that time in the U.S., mainly because it does apply to what we're talking about here. It all bleeds in to what William Wirt was doing, right, and what he was dealing with at the time. In the 19th century, the North American movement for the freedmen were picking up, right? The territory of Texas made it unlawful. So they started making a stand. They were the first state to start making a stand, a big stand against enslaved people. In 1841, the U.S. Supreme Court finds that Africans aboard the Armistead ship are free, and Texas residents have to start reporting freedom seekers. So they're saying on one hand it's illegal, but on the other hand, if you're enslaved already and you're trying to seek freedom, we want you to report them. And if you're a freedman and you're living in Texas, you still can't own a weapon. You can't have a public job. You can't have any rights like that. We'll recognize you as free, and we don't recognize slavery, but you still don't have any rights. So that was going on just right then in Texas. 1842, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that states do not need to offer assistance to recapturing freedom seekers. Georgia declared that they will not consider freedmen as citizens, right? So Texas and Georgia were on the same playing field as that. In 1843, we have Sojourner Truth comes out, and you've all heard the story of Sojourner Truth. William Wells Brown, and they were the anti-enslavement movement that started in the 1840s, and that's where the Underground Railroad started, was with William Bell, okay? William Brown, sorry. All right. In 1844 to 1864, the father of the Underground Railroad freed 60 people. In 1848, the Free Soil Party, the anti-enslavement groups that formed, they made the Free Soil Party. And it was a party that was just anti-enslavement, right? They were about freedom and equal rights for everyone. And that eventually became the Republican Party, all right? It went into the Freedmen's Society. In 1848, we had the first separate but equal laws fought in Boston. They lost, but that was the first trial. And I want you to remember, it wasn't the 1960s that these trials come up, the separate but equal stuff. This was 1848 when they started fighting for these rights.
Over 100 years earlier.
Right. In 1849, Harriet Tubman became integral in the Underground Railroad. And that's what the name that they recognized with everything. But you got to understand, she was 7 years after William Brown. And he had already started the Underground Railroad. All right. The concept of states' rights when it comes to that have been going around since the colonists, if you really think about it. Because when they come over here, the 13 colonies come over here, they were trying to make their own decisions individually in their own territories because they could not, and they did not obey England. They didn't answer to them. In each little territory, or what you want to call a state, they were making their own decisions based on their people in that area, right? So that was states' rights. Whether you want to look at it that way or not, that's what they were doing. They were choosing, as each individual territory, to make their own laws.
With all the travesty that was going on at this time, it took people like William Wirt Allen to step forward and do what was right.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're going to start our little talk about Mr. Allen here at his resting place. And again, thank you, sir, for serving. In 1818, Wade Allen migrated to Franklin County, Alabama. And he had his wife, Eliza Sayre. I had to look at her name again. And she was a native to this area, so she knew all about this. And the neat thing is even though he grew up, he started his life, William Wirt started his life in New Jersey, his father's passion was farming and agriculture. So they moved down here. They had a massive plantation, and Wirt loved it. William, that was what called to his soul. This was a man that he didn't want anything to do with politics. He didn't want to be a soldier. He wanted to go out there and grow some cotton or grow some corn or some wheat or whatever the people needed. That's what he wanted to do. But that didn't happen. See, because as Jennifer was mentioning, the government regulations at the time made tariffs soar.
Oh my God. By 1860, the South was paying 90%, 80 to 90% of the tariffs for the whole country, guys. Whatever small piece of that we call the country. The South was still paying 80 to 90% of the tariffs and the taxes on that stuff. Like, we were carrying the weight for everybody else.
Right, and it was import and export.
Right.
It was both of them. And people like Wirt needed to step up, and he did. He moves down here. He's a child. He grows up on this plantation, and he gets a very good education. And that's something that he was afforded that a lot of Southern children weren't at the time.
Right.
See, because times were so bad, if by the time you were 8 or 9 years old, you were doing something to bring money home to the family. It wasn't your money. It's not like kids today. You go out and you earn $5 and now what am I going to go spend it on? You would come home with 5 cents and say, Mama, can we get some flour?
Right, or put this in the jar for food.
That's right.
And groceries.
Can we get some sugar?
Right.
Or
coffee, or yeah.
You know, Christmas in those days was an apple and an orange for most families. So William Wirt was very blessed to be able to attend the public school system. And he was a very intelligent man. Mm-hmm. Let's not take that away from him. Very intelligent. So as he's getting all of his education, he graduates. He goes to Princeton. He gets a law degree at Princeton. And after he graduates, mighty law degree, what does he do? Well, he goes back to his plantation. And he starts growing stuff again.
Because your passion is going to call to you, and it doesn't matter what your career is. That might have something totally different. That might be what gave him money and put bread on his table. But I tell you what, the farming, when you are in a country life and you like farming like we do, and you like living out in the country like we do, it doesn't matter what your career is. That's where you're going to navigate to.
So 3 years after he graduates, he marries Susan Ball. And over the course of their marriage, now they have 11 children. His children, good people, but they're not part of his story as far as this goes. Time moves on. Around January 1861, Alabama Governor Andrew Barrymore. Now this guy, he's pretty neat. Maybe we'll do something on him later, but he was totally against secession. Mm-hmm. He wanted the United States to stay the United States. He said we can work our stuff out. When he made governor and he saw how bad the situation really was, in other words, it's like in today's world where he made governor and now he sees that his state's being overrun by immigrants and by high inflation. As the governor, he had to do something. So in January of that year, that Governor Moore filed the Ordinance of Secession.
Okay.
Now, it wasn't long after that.
It was in November of that year that they established the 1st Alabama Cavalry.
Right. So, but in April of 1861, first shots fired, Fort Sumter. We got ourselves a war, folks. It's time to start getting ready. Being the patriot that William Allen is, he went and he was one of the first ones to sign up for the 1st Alabama Cavalry.
Right. Okay, and that started in 1861 under Colonel Clinton. And the thing about the 1st Alabama Cavalry, and a lot of people don't understand, they're all like, Sherman just wiped through the South. Well, I'm going to tell you something about the 1st Alabama Cavalry. Every time Sherman turned a corner, they were there. Every time that he thought he was getting victory somewhere, they were pushing him back. Now he might eventually got through and got through and won. But the first Alabama cavalry was one of those people that he sat at night and said, damn those people, right? Because he was getting pushback from the first Alabama cavalry every time he turned around. Believe it or not, guys, they were holding them back.
Well, and one thing to note too is when he went into the cavalry, he went in as a lieutenant. Now, why did he go in as a lieutenant? I'm sure a lot of it had to do with his education and his background.
It does.
So, you know, kind of like today, it'd be the same as going to West Point, going in as an officer.
Well, if you have a college degree and you join the military, they're going to try to make you an officer because you're educated. And that's really what it comes down to.
He quickly rose. In 1862, he became the first major in the cavalry and led that group. And he was quickly promoted to colonel, and he handled a lot of the Kentucky front up there.
Right.
Under Bragg. Now, Bragg was the main general at that time. And if you go back and you watch the episode on the Battle in the Clouds,
right, yes,
then you'll get to hear a little bit more about Bragg. But Bragg was the main general. Again, he's not part of our story today. But they gained a lot of ground in East Tennessee campaign, and that was up until the Battle of Perryville. And he led the first Alabama cavalry, and they were pushing forward. And for whatever reason, and I'll tell you what, guys, I love the Civil War. I've looked at this stuff. I have no idea why Bragg fell back at that point. I think a lot of it may have had to do with communications, because he couldn't just pull out a cell phone and say, hey, Ellen, where are you guys at? You set? So Bragg got scared. I really think Bragg got scared, and that is why he retreated that area. But that's not the end of the story.
Well, they went to, it was a battle at Stewart's Creek in 1863, of December 1863, that he got wounded. He got really wounded to the point that he couldn't use his right arm and right hand anymore.
Right, and that was at the Battle of Murfreesboro, because Bragg was pushed back. Right. So Bragg pushed back. He went into Tennessee, and that was where we have the Battle in the Clouds and all of that episode there. So we have Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He gets injured. He has to go home. He's pretty banged up, and he was home for a year, well over a year, till he was well enough to return to service in 1864. But he never, ever got full use of his right hand back. It just was the surgery, and it was the times, guys. They didn't have it. But he returned and was promoted to brigadier general. Like right upon his return, brigadier general. He was in command of 6 Alabama cavalry regiments in Dalton, Georgia.
Daggone.
So, you know, how important are you when you're made the brigadier general over 6 units?
And so they didn't care if he had a right hand or not. He had the brain and the knowledge and the expertise in the areas that everything in his lifetime had afforded him, and they used that for their benefit.
Early 1865. Now we know the war's going on. We had Gettysburg.
Sorry.
You know, it was just, Gettysburg was not a good deal for us. Unfortunately, that's another battle we'll cover. But just to kind of sum it up, the Democrats at that time were just bringing in.
You're going to make sure those cowboys don't stop the surge of military-aged men from entering. To send F-15s to Texas here and wage war against Texas, and so be it.
And it's the same situation we're in today now. We have that same area where we have all of these young military people coming in. But anyways, in 1865, we have the Carolina campaign. And we're pushing up through the Carolinas. William Wirt is doing everything he can to gain ground. And he was a very intelligent military officer. I don't know why he's not in history books more with some of his accomplishments through, especially in the Carolina campaign and his initial start in the Kentucky campaign. But ultimately, he surrendered in the Carolinas in 1865, about the same time all the other generals were in little courthouses surrendering around the nation.
And you would think that was his story, and he would retire and go back to farming and forget everything. Trail at Ruffner Mountain. He had to go put her back in the backpack. Look at this, guys. It's pretty. Right.
So raised in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania areas till about 11, all the way to Alabama. Works in the plantation. Civil War happens. Great man during the Civil War. Well, as we said, the Civil War ended in 1865. Brigadier General, he had to put his signature. Fortunately, after the Civil War, most of the Confederate generals and military officers were pardoned. And it didn't take long after the war. They were pardoned because the goal of the country was Reconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
Let's build back better. Heard that before.
Right.
But it was kind of a build back better type deal. So he returns to the plantation. He gets involved with the railroads. And while he's working on the railroads,
Yeah.
he helps with a lot of key integral runs through the state of Alabama. But at the same time, he just was not able to give up his military career. And I don't know if it was by choice or if it was just a love, but he was the aggregate general, which is essentially like the military officer in today's world, I think. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think the aggregate general is over, more or less kind of over the National Guard type at the time.
Right, the AG.
So he did that. And this man just led an impressive life. And before he died, and his death, what was it, 1894. 1894 is when his death was. And before his death, if you check back on the video that we did at the Confederate Memorial Gardens, he had an integral part in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
He helped set up the Confederate Survivors Association in Montgomery. So even then, he was still working for the people.
And he was working for veterans. It's just kind of like that Confederate Memorial place we went to, that homestead that had the hospital and the little community there for the veterans. He was integral and stuff like that. He wanted to take care of the veterans that served in the Civil War.
Right. And everything that this man did was for not only his family, not only what he believed in, but for his country and everyone around him.
Mm-hmm.
Taking care of others is definitely something we should all look into doing.
Then
like our veterans.
Then he became a marshal.
Right. I forgot about that. You're right. He was a U.S. Marshal for a while.
Right.
And this was at the same time he was an AG.
Mm-hmm.
So the two roles somewhat overlapped a bit. But yes, he did U.S. Marshal. This man, he lived a life of service.
I'll tell you how that overlapped and why he would choose that. Because the AG don't really have the permit to like arrest someone or prosecute them for their crimes. But a marshal can. A marshal can take someone in and have them prosecuted for their crimes. And I think that come into that part of it, the legal part of it, the reason why he wanted to be a marshal.
But William Allen was a true patriot.
Yes.
He put his needs and the needs of the Alabamians above any need of his own or his own family. Despite his immense education, he wanted to live a simple life, and I can't blame him for that.
So he was a simple man.
Very simple man with a lot of knowledge.
And he always stuck to his principles and beliefs no matter what the world was saying to him. And I honored that about him.
So as we're thinking about what's going on in this country today, and we're reflecting back on things in the past, read the story on William Wirt Allen for yourself and see that he is a true American war story.